Hi, Kieran here. Now, what is the grid in graphic design? The grid's an ultra useful design tool or concept, not really a tool, more of a concept, used for page layout in graphic design. It divides two-dimensional spaces, printed, published documents or screens or, interfaces. Divides those two-dimensional spaces into smaller fields. Those fields are then used as a guide for the placement, scaling and a proportional arrangement of different elements within a design. Here what we can see is what looks like a screen grab of a simple 4-column text grid laid out in InDesign. That provides the structural underpinning of a layout like this, which this text looks like lorem ipsum. It's just garbage, but it's in there to lay out the text with a flush left and ragged right sort of look. Here's a more vaguely contemporary kind of example of a text or a poster laid out with just simply text over a grid, and we can see how the grid is providing a little bit of structure and continuity to this layout. It's not necessarily a very contemporary idea though. The grids have been in use, and page layout has followed a form and a structure for millennia. Before the development of movable type, which occurred in China over 1,000 years ago, up to the printing press developed by Johann Gutenberg in the 1450s. Even before those systems were in place, there were methods based on optimal proportions that were used to govern page layout. Interestingly, these methods were rediscovered by more contemporary European designers, Van der Graaf, Jan Tischold and others. There's speculation that these ideas of laying out pages with divine proportions and so on might be very, very old. So Tischold, for instance, who was a leading advocate of modernist design in the 20s and beyond, or beginning in the 1920s and beyond, was a leading hand in developing these ideas. So why bother using the grid? What it does is to help us to organise type, imagery and graphical elements, neatens up layouts, provides structure to information and general page layout. It can improve the circulation of the eye within a composition, allowing a designer to lead a viewer from one place to another and reveal information. Helps to reinforce visual hierarchy within a layout, and does really make multiple layouts appear varied but unified, which is quite important. And we see an example of that in these couple of pages of sketches. So the grid at the top left, a rough arrangement of 4 by 8, 4 columns by 8 rows. Each example uses the same grid but varies the placement of text, images and negative space in the white. So you can see a massive variety of options there. These design options haven't even gone beyond the grid. They're just using the grid as it appears in that first example. So where can we find examples? Pretty much everywhere. Posters, magazine layouts and covers, album art, business cards, websites, mobile devices and games, credit and title sequences. Doesn't even have to be static, they can be moving. Examples of the grid are everywhere. Through the work of people like Tischold through the 20th century, the second half of the 20th century, the grid really took on a corporate approach. It was used by corporate or designers working for corporate entities to communicate that unified and regular kind of view of the world. It wasn't really until the little bit later on, the 20th century, that the grid started to be disregarded in some respects, but it's always come back to, it seems. Here are some more examples of printed material magazine layouts that are underpinned by simple gridded structures. Once we become aware of the potential for grids, it's quite easy to see them or to imagine them sitting under documents, screen layouts and so on. So the structure of the grid. We're looking at some fairly simple examples here: margins, top edges and bottom edges, right and left. Once again, an InDesign kind of view. Facing pages, we've got the inside edges there that are looking, in this example, to be pretty much the same width as the outside edge. That I'm not sure if that's not a little bit unusual. When determining those margin widths, though, we do need to consider visual impact and functionality, and this is the work that those designers we spoke about before, Van der Graaf and Tischold, were investigating. How the impact of grids and layouts could be controlled by things like the golden ratio and that sort of stuff. Thicker publications require wider inside margins. Our structure of the grids are broken down into the very smallest unit of the grid is the field, and that's essentially the intersection of a row and a column. But we have a field, which is the smallest part. Columns, determining the width of images or columns of text. More likely that columns of text will conform to that column. Images can sort of tend to break out and so on. The little gaps down the middle, known as the gutter, sometimes referred to as an alley, but more often a gutter. And that is the space between those columns. The vertical space between the fields determines our rows. Okay, there we have it. The grid. The best way to really get to grips with this is to start putting together some layouts and seeing the advantages that can be gained from having that solid pre-planning of an underlying grid, which then helps the rest of our designs to really make visual sense.